You know, sometimes I think the great joke of existence is how earnest we all become about it. How we stride through the days like clerks in some cosmic office, ticking boxes, pushing papers of purpose, stamping meaning upon each passing hour, as though life itself were waiting for our report. And yet, there's no one to submit it to. No final auditor in the sky. No stern examiner with a clipboard marking your progress. Only you caught in the delicious confusion of being alive, trying, in all your seriousness, to prove something to yourself that never truly needed proof. See, the trick of life is not to solve it, but to play with it. To realize that the whole business of being this strange dance of laughter and tears was never meant to be taken as a test. We are the only species that seems embarrassed about being here. A cat doesn't wake in the morning worrying whether it's living up to its potential as a cat. A tree doesn't compare its branches to the next trees. But we humans, oh, how we fret. We spend our lives straightening imaginary ties, rehearsing for some performance that never actually begins. You are here, breathing, hearing these words, and all the things you've been trying so hard to achieve, all the roles you've played, the impressions you've crafted, they're like costumes in a grand play. Beautiful, yes, but only costumes. Imagine for a moment that you're at a masquerade ball. Everyone's dressed in their finest, masks glittering, music swelling. You could spend the evening worrying whether your costume is convincing, or you could dance. You could laugh, spill your drink, twirl a stranger, forget for a while who's behind the mask. And in that forgetting, you find yourself, because the point of the ball was never the mask, you see. It was the dance. So many people live as though the music must be analyzed, the steps perfected, the outcome secured. But life isn't an exam. It's jazz improvised, surprising, playful. It happens through you, not because of you. When you try too hard to hold it, it wriggles away. When you laugh and let it move, it carries you. I once met a man who was very serious about being spiritual. He sat so upright in meditation that you could hang a coat on his back. His brow furrowed, his lips pursed, as though enlightenment was something he might force open by sheer posture. And I thought, poor fellow, he's working far too hard to let go. The more you grip the idea of awakening, the further it runs. The harder you try to become serene, the louder the mind protests. Until, in sheer exhaustion, you laugh and there it is. The peace you were chasing was the laughter itself. Seriousness is a subtle form of fear. It's the mind's way of saying, if I relax, everything will fall apart. But what if just imagine the very thing you're trying to hold together never needed your grip at all? Like a child holding a soap bubble, terrified it will burst. And yet when the bubble does burst, what remains? Only a little shimmer, a smile, and the air itself unchanged. Life is full of bursting bubbles, relationships, jobs, identities, plans. They shimmer for a time and then they go. But the air remains. You, the space in which it all happens, are never diminished. Don't take life so seriously, because it's not a fixed thing to be mastered. It's a living movement, a play that unfolds through laughter, error, and wonder. Have you noticed how children approach the world? When they play, they're utterly absorbed knights, explorers, monsters, but never solemn. They can die dramatically on the battlefield, and 5 seconds later rise to become astronauts. They take the game seriously only while it's being played. They don't mistake it for life itself. And yet, as adults, we forget. We become accountants of the soul, measuring progress, counting virtues, comparing destinies. We think that if we worry enough, we'll somehow protect ourselves from loss. But worry doesn't guard you. It only drains the color from the moment you already have. Try an experiment sometime. Go about your day as though it were a kind of dream. When you wake in the morning, see if you can notice the absurdity, this curious creature you are, getting up, brushing teeth, making coffee, speaking words into the air, and calling it conversation. It's all wonderfully strange. And yet, when you notice that strangeness, not mockingly but tenderly, something opens, a freedom. Because in that moment, you're no longer trapped in the performance. You're watching it with affection. You begin to see that life doesn't need to be conquered or explained or tamed. It only asks to be noticed and perhaps chuckled at. For instance, think of how people argue about meaning. Philosophers, theologians, scientists, all terribly serious men, shaking fists of intellect at the mystery of being. But what if the mystery was never meant to be solved? What if it's an invitation to dance? Meaning isn't a riddle to be cracked. It's a song to be sung. And you can't sing it with clenched teeth. So relax your grip. Let yourself be a little foolish. Let life surprise you. When you walk down the street, look at people's faces, the tension, the furrowed brows, the silent rehearsals of imagined conversations. Everyone trying to manage life rather than live it. But the beauty of being human is that you can step out of that management role. You can drop the clipboard and just watch the show. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is laugh at your own seriousness. Because, you see, when you laugh, you return to the center. Not the shallow laughter of mockery, but the deep, unguarded laughter that says, "Ah, I see. It was never as heavy as I thought." That's the laughter of release. The moment you realize that even your confusion, your mistakes, your longing are part of the great comedy. A friend once told me, "I take my responsibilities very seriously." And I said, "That's fine, just don't take yourself seriously." Because you can care deeply about things, work hard, love fiercely, and still know it's all play. Seriousness isn't the same as sincerity. You can be sincere without being solemn. In fact, the most profound people I've met are the ones who carry a quiet sparkle in their eyes, as if they've seen through the game and decided to keep playing anyway. You see, when you stop taking life so seriously, you don't become careless, you become carefree. There's a difference. One is neglect, the other is liberation. Stop and listen to yourself thinking. You'll hear the mind whispering all sorts of things. Be better, do more, prove it, fix it. But who is listening? Who watches those thoughts come and go? That stillness behind the voice, that's you. And that stillness is untouched by any of it. No matter how dramatic the play becomes, the audience remains unharmed. You are the audience, not the actor. And once you remember that, the play becomes delightful again. Now, this doesn't mean you should retreat from life or stop caring about what happens. Not at all. In fact, when you no longer cling to outcomes, you can engage more fully because you're not acting out of fear, you're acting out of curiosity. Imagine painting a picture. If you're obsessed with how it will turn out, your hand tightens, your strokes become hesitant. But if you paint for the joy of movement, the colors sing. That's how life works too. The universe is not asking you to be perfect. It's asking you to participate. When you stop taking it so seriously, you stop resisting its rhythm. You become, quite naturally, in tune. And this is the quiet secret behind laughter, behind spontaneity, behind peace. It's not something you achieve. It's something you allow. So, let it be light. Let your own existence be a kind of gentle smile, not a grin of denial, but a calm acknowledgement that this whole thing, this life, is utterly miraculous and profoundly absurd at the same time. The human being is the cosmic joke telling itself. And the punchline is always you. See, when you begin to loosen your grip on the seriousness of it all, something extraordinary happens. You start to breathe differently. You start to see how much effort it actually took to hold up that heavy mask, the one called me. And when you finally set it down, what relief. You discover that the one you were pretending to be was never truly necessary. That life has been quite content to carry on quite merrily. In fact, without your constant supervision. It's as if you've been standing by a river, scooping the water with both hands, desperately trying to control its flow. And the river simply laughs and continues downstream. The great mischief of being human is this. We imagine that we must make life happen, when in truth, life is happening all by itself. The heart beats, the lungs breathe, thoughts appear and dissolve. You didn't order these functions, you inherited them. They are gifts, spontaneous, effortless, unearned. And yet we wander about, worrying whether we're doing life right. It's rather like the waves wondering whether they're waving properly. Now, I don't say this to mock our seriousness. It comes from a beautiful impulse, the wish to do well, to be worthy, to make sense of it all. But somewhere along the way, that impulse hardens into tension. We forget that worthiness was never a qualification, it was the starting point. A child doesn't ask, "Do I deserve to play?" It just plays. And in doing so, it becomes the pure expression of life itself. Can you imagine if the universe required a license to exist? If before every sunrise, there had to be an official signature granting permission? Ridiculous, isn't it? And yet, many of us live as though we're waiting for that permission to relax, to laugh, to be ourselves. The whole trick, you see, is realizing that you're already approved. Existence is your invitation. The problem with taking life too seriously is that it turns this grand adventure into a chore. We become like bureaucrats in our own hearts, stamping every joy with suspicion, filing away every moment into categories of success or failure. But life, my dear friend, doesn't work in spreadsheets. It dances in spirals, not straight lines. The moments that really matter, the ones that change you, are never the ones you planned. They happen in the small absurdities, the misplaced key that leads to a new conversation, the mistake that becomes an opportunity, the laughter that breaks through tears. It's all beautifully unplanned. When you stop taking life so seriously, you begin to notice its artistry. The way everything seems to balance chaos and order, gain and loss, the tragic and the comic, like a cosmic juggler keeping the whole act alive. And you are part of that juggling act. Not as a burden, but as a rhythm. You might fall from time to time, of course you will, but even the fall is part of the dance. Imagine a comedian who never makes a mistake, never forgets a line. Wouldn't that be dreadfully dull? The beauty of the performance lies in its fragility, the risk that something might go wrong. That's what makes it alive. And that's what makes you alive. So, when you stumble, don't scold yourself. Smile. You're improvising. The universe loves a good improvisation. You see, this is what we forget when we take ourselves too seriously, that we are, each of us, improvisations. There's no final script, no master plan etched in stone. Life is not a rule book, it's a jazz session. You come in with your instrument, listen to the others, find your rhythm, and play. Some notes will clash, others will soar. And at the end, all that remains is the music. When you see this clearly, you begin to understand that there's no real separation between the sacred and the ordinary. The laughter of a child, the smell of morning coffee, the awkward silence between two people, all of it is sacred, precisely because it's so fleeting. Don't be fooled into thinking enlightenment is something distant, wrapped in incense and robes. It's right here in the ordinary absurdity of things, in the way your shoe squeaks on a rainy street, in the way your mind drifts while waiting at a red light, in the way you catch yourself being terribly serious, and then for no reason you laugh. That's it. That laughter is enlightenment, because in that instant, the whole pretense collapses. The heavy machinery of me pauses, and what remains is just life, as it is. That's the secret. Enlightenment isn't something you add to yourself, it's what's left when you stop pretending. Now, I can almost hear your mind asking, but if I don't take life seriously, won't I become lazy or careless? Ah, but notice that seriousness talking again. Seriousness always disguises itself as responsibility. But true responsibility doesn't come from fear, it comes from love. When you love a flower, you water it not because you're serious about flowers, but because it brings you joy. When you love a person, you care for them not as an obligation, but as a natural expression of your being. And when you love life, truly love it, you participate in it wholeheartedly, playfully, freely. You act not because you must, but because you may. So let the seriousness drop. Let yourself be moved by the music. When joy calls, answer. When sorrow arrives, welcome it too, not as an enemy, but as another note in the melody. After all, even the saddest song is beautiful when you stop resisting its tune. Life doesn't ask you to always smile, it asks you to feel. It doesn't demand perfection, it invites participation. There's an old saying, angels can fly because they take themselves lightly. Perhaps that's the simplest wisdom of all. To take yourself lightly, not flippantly, not irresponsibly, but lightly, as in with grace, as if your very being were a dance of air, passing through this moment just long enough to notice it. So, what would it be like, right now, to take yourself lightly, to set aside every idea of what you should be, and simply be as you are, a temporary expression of the infinite, humming along for a brief, miraculous instant? Once you taste that lightness, you find that life no longer needs to be conquered or controlled. You begin to trust it. You realize that the same intelligence that makes a seed bloom and the stars burn is moving through you, guiding you in ways your mind could never calculate. And in that trust, there is peace. You can walk through the world with a kind of gentle humor, the humor of someone who knows that even their mistakes are divine mischief. You can meet the unknown not with dread, but with curiosity. You can love without needing to own, work without needing to win, live without needing to justify. For the moment you stop taking life so seriously, you return to its center where joy and sorrow, gain and loss, birth and death are all part of one vast, laughing rhythm. Listen. The laughter of existence is everywhere. It hums through the heart, through the wind, through every passing glance between strangers. It says, "Don't you see, it's all right. You're already home." And so, when you wake tomorrow, when you step once more into the curious play of ordinary life, remember, you are not required to have it all figured out. There are times in life when you feel as though you have wandered off the map. You look around and nothing seems familiar. The signposts that once guided you are gone. The landmarks that once gave you confidence have vanished, and suddenly you are overcome with a strange disorientation. You may call it confusion, uncertainty, or despair, but beneath all those names is a single experience. You feel lost. To be lost is not simply to lack direction. It is to have once believed you knew where you were going, only to realize that the path has dissolved beneath your feet. And in that moment, everything you trusted begins to tremble. The career you thought would define you feels empty. The relationship you believed would complete you unravels. The ideals you clung to no longer hold weight. You stand in the middle of life's forest and see only trees, stretching endlessly with no clear way forward. At first, this can feel like failure. After all, we are taught from childhood that life is a journey with a clear destination, and that our task is to find the straightest route to that destination. Parents, teachers, leaders, and advertisements all hand us maps. They tell us, study hard, get the right job, marry the right person, accumulate wealth, and you will arrive safely at happiness. But sooner or later, many of us discover that these maps are faulty. They do not match the terrain. We follow them diligently, only to find ourselves in places we never wanted to be. And when the map fails us, we feel lost. Yet perhaps this sense of being lost is not the catastrophe it appears to be. Perhaps it is, in fact, a gift. For the truth is, the map was never the territory. It was only a picture, a sketch, a simplified story. The territory itself is always more vast, more wild, more unpredictable than any map can show. And when the map is torn away, frightening though it may be, we are at last forced to look at the territory with our own eyes. We discover reality directly, without the filter of borrowed instructions. Consider how a traveler might cling desperately to a guidebook, reading every detail and trying to match it to the streets of a city. But one day, the book is lost, and the traveler is forced to wander. At first, there is panic, but then, slowly, the city comes alive. Sights and sounds emerge that the book never mentioned. Hidden alleyways, unexpected encounters, uncharted beauty. What once seemed like disorientation becomes discovery. Being lost is the doorway to truly seeing, and so it may be with your own life. The disorientation you feel is not proof that you have failed, but proof that you are finally meeting reality as it is. You are no longer shielded by the maps of others, no longer protected by the certainty of borrowed truths. You are naked before the mystery, and though it is terrifying, it is also alive. To be lost is to be free of false guidance, free to wander, free to see freshly. Yet notice how hard it is to accept this. The mind clings to certainty like a child clings to a blanket. We would rather have a false map than no map at all. We would rather pretend we know than admit we do not. And so the moment of lostness feels unbearable. But look closer. The discomfort arises not from being lost itself, but from resisting it. The trees are only frightening because you demand a clear path. The silence is only heavy because you insist on constant noise. If you let yourself rest in the lostness, something begins to shift. Have you ever noticed how silence deepens when you stop straining to fill it? At first it is uncomfortable, but then it becomes rich, almost musical. In the same way, lostness becomes meaningful when you stop insisting on certainty. It becomes a vast openness, a space in which anything is possible. What felt like a dead end reveals itself as the edge of a larger horizon. You are not trapped, you are unmoored, and that is a very different thing. Think of a river. We often imagine it as having a single destination, flowing inevitably toward the sea, but along the way it meanders, branches, doubles back, floods and dries. If you stand on its banks at any given moment, you might say, this river is lost. It is wandering aimlessly. But from the larger view, it is simply the river being itself, finding its way through the land as it must. To be lost is only to be seen from too narrow a perspective. From the broader perspective, nothing is lost at all. So when you feel lost, what is really happening? You are awakening to the fact that life is not a straight road with a fixed destination. You are realizing that all the maps were temporary, that they could never contain the mystery of existence. And while this realization unsettles the mind, it liberates the heart. For then you no longer have to pretend. You no longer have to force yourself into paths that do not fit. You can allow yourself to wander, to question, to begin again. Lostness, then, is not the enemy of life. It is life breaking through the illusions you once clung to. It is reality reminding you that the point was never to arrive, but to move, to explore, to live. To be lost is to stand at the threshold of discovery, trembling perhaps, but also alive with possibility. And notice how, in those moments of disorientation, the smallest details become radiant. When the big picture collapses, the present moment comes to the foreground. You feel the air on your skin. You hear the rustle of leaves. You notice the rise and fall of your breath. The mind, stripped of its maps, returns to immediacy. And in that immediacy, you find a strange peace. For the present moment has no need for maps. It is complete in itself. In truth, you cannot be lost in the present. Lostness always refers to the future or the past. You say, I do not know where I am going, or I should not be where I am. But here, now, you are simply here. The ground supports you. The breath moves in and out. Life continues. To drop into the present is to see that lostness is only a thought, not a reality. And when that thought softens, what remains is not despair but wonder. So perhaps, rather than resisting lostness, you might welcome it. You might see it as an initiation, a necessary stage in awakening. For who has ever truly found themselves without first being lost? Who has ever discovered truth without first seeing the failure of illusion? The very word discover means to uncover, to remove what once covered over reality. Lostness removes the cover, and though the exposure is raw, it is also true. In the end, the feeling of being lost may be the most honest feeling of all, for it admits what is always the case, that we do not ultimately know where life is taking us. The certainty we cling to is a fragile construction. Lostness tears it away and reveals the vastness beyond. And in that vastness, you may find not the path you expected, but the path you needed. When the path disappears beneath your feet, when the signs no longer point the way, and when the horizon stretches endlessly in every direction, something remarkable begins to happen. You start to discover that being lost is not an obstacle to life, but part of its essence. For what does it mean to be found, if not to have first been lost? And what does it mean to have direction, if not to have wandered without one? To feel lost is to be placed at the heart of mystery, where life can no longer be reduced to neat explanations. The truth is, you were never truly in control of the journey. You imagined that you were choosing each step, plotting each destination, and charting each course. But look closely. Did you decide to be born? Did you choose your first breath, your first thought, your first desire? Life has been carrying you all along, flowing like a river that bends and turns without asking permission. To feel lost is simply to realize this, that the river does not always follow your map, but it always flows, always moves, always carries. And so, the moment of lostness is also the moment of truth. It is the place where the illusion of control begins to crack, where you see that you are not the little navigator steering through a dangerous sea, but the very sea itself, with all its waves and currents. The loss of certainty is the birth of freedom, for now you no longer need to force life to conform to your plans. You can begin to move with it, to surrender to its rhythm, to trust that it knows more than you ever could. This is what the ancient sages called wu wei, effortless action, flowing with the grain of things instead of against it. Imagine a dancer moving to music. The dancer does not plan each step in advance, nor does she fight the rhythm. She listens, responds, allows the body to be moved by the sound. In the same way, life invites you to dance with it. Lostness is the silence before the music begins, the pause that invites you to listen more deeply. And when you do, you may find yourself moving with a grace you did not know was possible. Think of how a bird flies. It does not calculate each gust of wind, each eddy of air. It spreads its wings and trusts the sky to hold it. Or think of how a wave rises on the ocean. It does not know where it will crest, nor when it will fall, yet it belongs perfectly to the movement of the whole. To feel lost is to realize that you, too, are like the bird and the wave carried by something larger, included in a pattern beyond comprehension. You do not need to know the way, because the way is already unfolding through you. And here is the paradox. It is often when you stop searching desperately for direction that direction appears. Have you noticed how solutions come most easily when you stop trying to force them? How clarity arises not in the frenzy of thought, but in the quiet of letting go. To be lost is to be emptied of old certainties, and in that emptiness, new possibilities emerge. The openness of lostness is the very ground in which discovery grows. But what is it that we discover in lostness? First, we discover that the self we thought we were, the one who must always know, always plan, always control, is not as solid as it seemed. You believed you were the driver behind the eyes, the thinker of thoughts, the chooser of actions, but in lostness, that image crumbles. You see that thoughts arise on their own, feelings come and go, choices present themselves like waves breaking on the shore. The you who was supposed to be in charge is nowhere to be found, and though this may seem frightening, it is also liberating. For if the little self is not in control, then the burden is lifted. Life can flow as it will, and you can rest. Second, we discover that lostness is not separation, but intimacy. When the map is gone, you are no longer looking at life from above, as though it were an object to be controlled. You are inside it, immersed, woven into every detail. The rustle of leaves, the sound of rain, the rhythm of breath, all of it surrounds you, includes you, moves with you. Lostness dissolves the distance between you and the world. You realize you were never a separate traveler moving through a foreign land. You are the land itself, the path itself, the very movement of the journey. And third, we discover that lostness is not permanent. It is a season, like winter, cold, perhaps harsh, but also necessary. For in winter the ground rests, the trees shed their leaves, and what seems like death is preparation for spring. To be lost is to enter a season of dormancy, of waiting, of gestation. It is not the end, but the pause before renewal. And when spring comes, when new paths open, you may see that the lostness was not wasted. It was the soil from which new life grew. So rather than resisting lostness, we might honor it. We might see it as part of the great rhythm of existence, the ebb and flow of knowing and not knowing, of clarity and confusion, of direction and wandering. Just as day and night belong together, just as tide and trough are inseparable, so too do foundness and lostness belong to one another. Without lostness, foundness would have no meaning. Without confusion, clarity would not shine. This is why many traditions speak of the dark night of the soul, a period of disorientation and emptiness that precedes awakening. It is not punishment, but preparation. It is the breaking open of the old so that the new can enter. And so when you feel lost, you may trust that something is ripening beneath the surface, something that will emerge in its own time. You do not need to force it any more than you can force a seed to sprout before it is ready. You need only wait, trust, and allow. And in that waiting, you may find a peace you did not expect. For when you no longer demand that life provide answers, you are free to rest in the questions themselves. To live without knowing is not a failure. It is a kind of faith, a willingness to let life unfold without clinging. And in that faith, you may find that you are never truly lost at all. You are always here, always part of the unfolding, always held in the great embrace of existence. Look around you now. Notice the space in which these words appear. Notice the sensations in your body, the rhythm of your breath, the subtle sounds in the room. In this immediacy, there is no lostness. There is only presence. The feeling of being lost arises only when the mind insists on a map, on a certainty about the future. But here, now, there is nothing missing. The ground holds you. The breath moves. Awareness shines. In this presence, the idea of being lost dissolves, and what remains is wholeness. And so, when you feel lost, remember this: it is not a mistake. It is not proof that you are broken or that you have failed. It is life guiding you away from false maps, away from borrowed truths, toward the discovery of something deeper. Lostness is not the absence of path, but the opening to a greater path, one that cannot be charted in advance, but only walked moment by moment. You are not lost. You are the universe playing at being lost, so that it may discover itself anew. You are the wave that rises, not knowing where it will fall, the bird that soars without a fixed destination, the traveler who finds beauty only when the guidebook is forgotten. You are the dance itself, and the music, and the silence between the notes. And when you see this, when you feel it, not just as an idea, but as a lived reality, then lostness becomes something altogether different. It becomes freedom, intimacy, and trust. You no longer cling to certainty, for you see that certainty was never real. You no longer fear confusion, for you see that confusion is part of the dance. You no longer resist lostness, for you see that lostness is the doorway to being found. So let yourself be lost. Let yourself wonder, question, doubt, and stumble. For in that very wandering, life is carrying you. In that very doubt, truth is ripening. In that very stumbling, the path is appearing. And in the end, you may discover that you were never lost at all, but always exactly where you needed to be. Have you ever noticed how the harder you try to go to sleep, the more awake you become? The more you strain, the more the thing slips away from you. Sleep, after all, is a letting go. You close your eyes, you stop grasping, and suddenly, without effort, you find yourself drifting into dreams. That, you see, is the essence of what the Taoists called wu-wei effortless action. Now, this doesn't mean laziness. It doesn't mean lying around like a potato. Number wu-wei means action that arises naturally, without strain, without resistance, without trying to push the river. It's when you move like water, flexible, flowing, adapting to the shape of the world around you, yet with immense strength. For water can wear down stone, not by force, but by persistence, by yielding. We live in a world where people are taught from the very beginning that to succeed, you must struggle, you must fight, you must exert your will upon things. But the paradox is this: the more you fight, the more you tighten your grip, the more life slips between your fingers. Like trying to hold on to water, the tighter you squeeze, the more it runs out of your hands. The art of wu-wei is to realize that the universe itself is not a contest, it's a dance. You do not win at dancing. You do not arrive at the last step and say, that was the purpose. No, the point of dancing is the dancing. The point of music is the music. You don't play a symphony to get to the end. Otherwise, the fastest orchestra would always be the best. No, you play it for the unfolding of it, for the way it moves along. Life, too, is like this. But we, poor creatures of modern anxiety, have been trained to think of life as a race, a ladder to climb, a prize to win. And so we rush, we compete, we struggle. And in so doing, we miss the very thing that is in front of us. For what we are trying to grasp cannot be grasped. It can only be experienced. Wu-wei is not passivity. It is the realization that life is already happening of its own accord. Your heart beats without you commanding it. Your lungs breathe without your supervision. The stars swirl, the planets move, the waves crash on the shore, all without central management. You are not pushing this along, and yet somehow everything is happening perfectly. The difficulty arises because we imagine ourselves to be separate. We think of ourselves as little egos inside a bag of skin, struggling against the outside world. But if you look more closely, you will see that the boundary between you and the world is not so solid. Just as you can't have an inside without an outside, you can't have a self without a world. They are two sides of the same coin. When you understand this, you begin to realize that you don't need to fight life because you are life. The river does not push against itself. The ocean does not battle its waves. They are one movement, and so it is with you and the world. Think of the martial arts, judo, aikido, tai chi. The secret in all of them is not to pit force against force, but to yield, to redirect, to flow with the energy that comes your way. You don't meet the opponent with stiff resistance. You give way, and in giving way, you become more powerful than any brute strength could ever be. Wu-wei is like this in everyday life. When you stop fighting the current, you discover the river is carrying you exactly where you need to go. But here's the catch. The mind doesn't like this. The mind wants control. The mind wants certainty. The mind says, if I don't force it, it won't happen. Yet if you look at your own experience, the most wonderful things that have ever happened to you, love, inspiration, laughter, they all came uninvited. They arrived when you weren't looking for them. Have you ever noticed how the best ideas come when you're not trying? In the shower, on a walk, when you've given up, That's Wu Wei. Creativity doesn't come when you chase it with a whip. It comes when you stop clenching, when you make space for it. The ancient Taoists had a saying, the softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest. Water, again, yielding but unstoppable. The sage, they said, does nothing, and yet nothing is left undone. This sounds absurd until you realize what they mean. The sage does not interfere with the natural course of things. He doesn't shove the river, he lets it flow. And because of that, everything gets accomplished in its own time. Our tragedy is that we believe we are smarter than the universe. We think, if I don't take charge, chaos will reign. But step outside. Look at a forest. Look at the stars. Did you make those? Do you keep them running? Do you order the sun to rise? And yet, there it is, immense order, immense beauty, all happening without central command. You, too, are part of that. You don't need to be in charge, because you already belong to the order. So, when you practice Wu Wei, you are not giving up. You are aligning with the way things already are. You stop being the clenched fist and become the open hand. And in that openness, in that yielding, you discover a kind of strength that is effortless. The trouble is, the ego doesn't like this at all. It says, if I don't control, I'll be lost. If I don't struggle, I'll fail. And so the ego builds up an identity based on effort. Look at me, it says. Look how hard I work. Look at the battles I've fought. But in the end, what does it win? Stress, anxiety, exhaustion, and a life that feels like an endless treadmill. The Taoist sage laughs at this. He knows that to fight against the flow of life is like trying to make waves stop crashing on the shore. You can try, but it's hopeless. The waves will crash anyway. Better to learn to surf them, to ride them, to play. Wu Wei is not only effective, it is joyful. It restores a sense of play to life. You see, when you let go of control, you begin to notice things. You begin to hear the music of existence again. You taste food more vividly. You see colors more brightly. You laugh more easily, because you are no longer tensed up, waiting for the next battle. And here is the secret. When you live like this, you actually accomplish more, because you are not wasting energy fighting. You are not exhausting yourself in resistance. Your actions become precise, graceful, and effective, like an archer who hits the target not by straining, but by relaxing into the shot. Some of you may worry, but if I stop struggling, won't I become lazy? Won't I just drift? No, you won't, because life itself will move you. You cannot help but be alive. You cannot help but breathe. Even in doing nothing, something is happening. And when you are aligned with that, your actions will arise naturally, like blossoms in spring. Think of a tree. Does it force its leaves to grow? Does it strain to produce fruit? No, it simply stands, rooted, open to sun and rain. And in due season, the fruit appears. That is Wu Wei action that happens without forcing. And think of music. A jazz musician doesn't plan every note. He listens, he feels, he flows with what is happening. And because of that, the music is alive. If he tried to control every note, the song would die. So too with you. Your life is the music of the universe. Don't choke it with too much control. Let it swing. The modern world needs this teaching more than ever. We are a society addicted to effort. We believe that constant striving is the only way to achieve anything. And yet, we are exhausted, burnt out, miserable. We need to rediscover the wisdom of Wu Wei, for it tells us that true power is not in resistance, but in flow. Now, this doesn't mean you should never act. Quite the contrary. It means your action comes from a deeper place. It is not the frantic action of fear, but the graceful action of trust. Trust that you are part of something larger, and that something larger is carrying you as the ocean carries every wave. So the invitation is this: stop trying to push the river. Step into the current and let it carry you. Learn to yield, learn to trust, and you will find that life unfolds with a grace you could never have managed on your own. Wu Wei is not a trick. It is not a method to get what you want. It is the realization that you already are what you are seeking. You are the flow. You are the dance. And when you relax into that, you discover that effortless action is the only action worth taking. So let us laugh at the seriousness of our struggles and rediscover the play of existence. For life is not a problem to be solved, but a song to be sung, a dance to be danced. And the way to join in is not through strain, but through letting go. There comes a time, you know, when life begins to feel strangely unfamiliar, even when nothing around you has actually changed. You walk through the same rooms, you meet the same people, you say the same things, and yet it all feels as though you are watching it from a few feet away. It's as if you've stepped outside the costume you were wearing, but everyone else still sees you in it. And this is one of the most curious experiences a human being can have, because it feels at once like loss and liberation. You see, the funny thing about growing up is that we think it only happens to children. But in truth, growing up never stops. The body may reach its height, but the soul, if you let it, keeps expanding far beyond the forms it once knew. And the difficulty of this, of course, is that society isn't very well designed for it. Society wants you to remain recognizable. It says, stay the person we know. Don't change too quickly, or you'll make the rest of us nervous. But life doesn't listen to that kind of advice. Life moves, you see, like water flowing through the shape of a stream. And when the stream bends, the water doesn't argue, it simply flows. When you resist that movement in yourself, when you try to stay the same while something deeper is pulling you forward, you begin to feel this strange tension, this quiet ache, as though you're betraying something invisible inside you. And perhaps you felt that. You wake up one morning, and the music that used to excite you now sounds a little hollow. The ambitions you once chased begin to feel like chores. You go to the places you once loved, and the colors seem to have drained from them. You haven't become depressed. You've simply become aware. You've outgrown the language of your old life. It's rather like returning to your childhood home after many years. The house is smaller than you remember. The furniture seems oddly placed. You recognize everything, but it no longer holds you. This is what happens when you begin to awaken, when the consciousness within you starts to stretch beyond the limits of your identity. The world that once felt enormous begins to look like a set on a stage. Now look, this isn't something to be frightened of. It's quite natural. The problem arises only when you think you should still belong to that smaller world. When you start saying to yourself, I ought to still enjoy this. I ought to still believe that. I ought to still feel that old excitement. But you can't, because you are no longer the person who could. You see, we humans have this peculiar tendency to confuse familiarity with truth. If something feels familiar, we assume it must be right. And yet, everything that's true in life at some point feels unfamiliar because it's new. When you were born, even breathing was unfamiliar. When you fell in love, it was unfamiliar. Growth always feels that way. So the real spiritual challenge is not to force yourself back into comfort, but to sit quietly in this space of not knowing, this in-between place where the old world doesn't fit but the new one hasn't yet appeared. And that can be terribly uncomfortable, because you can't explain it to anyone. You can't tell your friends, I feel like the person you think I am is dissolving. They'll look at you rather strangely, but that's all right. Most of the world doesn't understand this process because most people are trying desperately not to go through it. You know, we spend so much of our lives trying to be consistent. We tell ourselves we must have a clear identity, a direction, a goal. We create these little psychological boxes and then feel very proud of keeping within them. But life, in its infinite playfulness, keeps shaking the box, nudging it open, whispering, "Come out, there's more." And when you finally dare to step out, you discover that the thing you called the world was never fixed at all. It was only the portion of reality your mind could recognize at the time. The world changes as your seeing changes. That's why it feels like you've outgrown it, because the old framework of perception can no longer contain what you now sense. Let's put it another way. Imagine a fish living in a small bowl. To the fish, that bowl is the entire universe. Then one day, someone moves it into a pond. At first, the fish might panic. The boundaries it depended on are gone. The water seems endless, and the familiar edges that once defined its safety are missing. But after a while, the fish begins to explore, and it realizes the pond was there all along. It simply couldn't see beyond the glass. That is what happens when consciousness expands. The bowl breaks, and you think you've lost your world, but really, you've gained it. Now, the difficulty with this kind of growth is that it doesn't come with a manual. No one tells you how to live when the old meanings stop working. And so, for a time, you feel lost. You may even think you're going backwards, that something has gone wrong, but I assure you, it hasn't. The sense of being lost is the sign that you're moving closer to what's real. Because to find reality, you must lose your illusions first. Perhaps it would help to remember that every transformation in nature involves a kind of death. The seed must die to become a tree. The caterpillar must dissolve to become the butterfly. The night must fall before the dawn can appear. And you, too, are part of that same rhythm. The parts of you that no longer serve your growth begin to fall away, sometimes painfully, sometimes quietly, but always inevitably. Now, people often ask, how do I know if I've really outgrown something, or if I'm just restless? Well, the difference is subtle, but unmistakable. Restlessness comes from wanting something different. Growth comes from becoming something different. Restlessness wants to escape. Growth wants to understand. Restlessness says, I can't stand this anymore. Growth says, this no longer fits who I am. And you feel it not as irritation, but as a gentle certainty. You see, real growth is never an act of rejection. You don't leave the old world in anger. You leave it in peace because you understand it. You see through it. And that understanding dissolves the need to belong to it. You no longer condemn the people who still live there. You realize that once upon a time, you did too. You can even love them more deeply because you no longer need them to be anything other than what they are. And so the world you've outgrown isn't an enemy. It's a teacher you've graduated from. And the strange melancholy that follows, because there is a melancholy, is not sadness, but gratitude. Gratitude that something so familiar could have nourished you long enough to bring you here. Now, this is where many people become confused, because they think enlightenment or awakening means always being happy, always feeling above the old life. But enlightenment, you see, is simply clarity. It's not an escape from being human. It's a deep acceptance of it. You still feel everything joy, sorrow, boredom, confusion, but you no longer resist it. You no longer mistake your passing moods for who you are. And as this realization deepens, the very world that once felt too small begins to look beautiful again. Not because it's changed, but because your seeing has. You can still walk through the same streets, talk to the same people, and yet it all feels luminous, transparent. You see the dance rather than the struggle. You see people not as obstacles, but as expressions of the same life moving through you. But you cannot reach this stage by force. You can't make yourself awaken. You can only notice when the old shell has cracked and stop pretending it hasn't. The rest happens by itself. The river flows because it must. and you too are being carried. When you let go of the effort to belong to your old story, you begin to sense the vastness that's been here all along. It's as if a fog lifts, and you realize that the world is not outside you, it is within you, reflected through your perception. That's why outgrowing the world feels so disorienting, because it's really your perception that's shifting, not the world itself. So perhaps you might stop asking, what's wrong with everything? And start asking, what is awakening in me? For when that question arises, something wonderful begins to happen. The confusion turns into curiosity. The loneliness turns into space. The silence, which once felt empty, becomes peaceful. And slowly, you begin to notice that there's a quiet intelligence at work beneath it all, that life itself knows how to unfold without your constant control. The tree doesn't struggle to grow, it simply grows. The ocean doesn't try to move, it moves. The stars don't plan their shining, they shine. And you, my friend, are no different. So don't be afraid of outgrowing the world around you. Don't try to shrink back into old patterns just to keep others comfortable, for that would be like a bird breaking its own wings to fit back into the nest. Let the winds of change lift you. Let the seasons of your being turn, because one day, when you look back, you'll see that the world you thought you left behind was not abandoned at all. It was transformed by your seeing. The world expands to the size of the soul that perceives it. And that is the beginning of true freedom. Now you see, once you've begun to sense that you've outgrown the world around you, something very strange happens. You begin to notice that you can't go back, not because anyone has locked the door, but because the person who would have fit there no longer exists. And this can be terribly unnerving at first, because most of us are brought up to believe that progress means more comfort, more belonging, more certainty. But the genuine progress of consciousness, the real awakening, moves in the opposite direction. It leads you into uncertainty, into the open, into a place where belonging has nothing to do with fitting in. When you awaken, you realize that belonging is not something you get from the world. It's something you remember within yourself. It's the recognition that you were never separate to begin with. The world was not something happening to you. It was something happening as you. But that's a difficult truth to digest, because we've spent our entire lives thinking of ourselves as little fragments, little egos floating around inside our skins, separate from everything else. And so when that boundary starts to dissolve, we panic. We say, if I'm not this person, if I'm not this role, who am I? But that question, you see, is precisely the doorway, because the truth can only enter when the old answers fail. The mind wants a definition, but life is not a definition. It's a process, a dance, an ongoing miracle of transformation. Now look, you can't pin that down. The moment you try to define yourself, you've already limited the mystery that you are. It's like trying to catch the wind in your hands. You can't do it. You can only feel it move through you, and that movement is you. This is why, when people begin to awaken, they often feel like they've lost themselves. They haven't. They've only lost the fiction of themselves, the story that was never truly theirs to begin with, the identity built from ideas, expectations, and fears. And once that illusion starts to crumble, what remains is something astonishingly simple: awareness itself. You see, awareness has no shape, no boundaries, no history. It is the space in which everything appears and disappears. Thoughts, feelings, people, places, they come and go. But the awareness in which they arise is untouched. It doesn't age. It doesn't change. It is the same awareness you had as a child, though its content has shifted countless times. So what's really happening when you outgrow the world is not that you're becoming better or more spiritual. Those are just words. What's really happening is that you're remembering that you were never the world to begin with. You were always the consciousness through which the world appeared. And that realization changes everything. It doesn't make you superior, it makes you humble. Because you see that every person, every bird, every leaf on every tree is an expression of the same consciousness, the same awareness looking through different eyes, the same life breathing through different forms. At that point, you no longer feel the need to prove anything. You stop arguing with reality. You stop trying to make life fit your idea of how it should be, because you realize it already is. The great cosmic joke is that all your efforts to control life were happening inside the very flow that was carrying you perfectly where you needed to go. It's like trying to row upstream in a river that's already taking you home. The moment you stop struggling, you discover that you've been moving effortlessly all along. Now, of course, the mind doesn't like this. The mind says, well, if I stop striving, won't I become lazy? Won't I lose my edge? But that's the trick of the ego, you see. The ego equates surrender with defeat. But surrender is not giving up, it's waking up. It's the recognition that you were never separate from the movement to begin with. Think of breathing. You don't have to remind yourself to do it. You can, if you want, take control for a while, but eventually the body breathes by itself. Life lives itself through you in the same way. The more you trust it, the more effortlessly it flows. And perhaps this is what growing beyond the world truly means. It doesn't mean renouncing the world. It doesn't mean escaping from it. It means seeing it as play, as rhythm, as a kind of divine game. When you see that, the heaviness drops away. You stop trying to make sense of everything, because you realize that sense itself is part of the dance. The philosopher's mistake has always been to think that life is a problem to be solved. But life isn't a problem, it's a mystery to be experienced. When you outgrow the world, you stop treating it like a puzzle and start moving with it like a melody. You see, the world around you is always changing, always dying and being reborn in every instant. The past you remember no longer exists. The future you imagine will never arrive the way you think. There is only this living moment, endlessly renewing itself. And you, if you're awake, are not separate from that renewal. You are it. And that, perhaps, is what people fear most, that they are not observers of life, but participants in it. Because to truly participate means to let go of control. It means to trust the unknown. It means to love without conditions, to laugh without reason, to cry without shame. But the more deeply you surrender, the more natural it becomes. You start to notice that the very energy that moves the stars is the same energy that moves your breath, that the silence between your thoughts is the same silence between the waves of the ocean. You realize that what you've been calling you and what you've been calling the world were never two different things. And suddenly, the question, have I outgrown the world, disappears, because there's no longer a you and a world to compare. There's only the dance. When this becomes clear, life begins to feel effortless again, but in a new way. Not the careless ease of ignorance, but the deep ease of understanding. You can walk through chaos and remain still inside. You can lose everything and feel as though nothing essential has been lost, because you finally see that what you are cannot be taken away. It's like realizing you are the screen on which the movie of life is projected. The scenes change, the characters appear and disappear, but the screen remains untouched. Once you know yourself as the screen, you can enjoy the movie fully, even the tragedies, because you know they're not ultimate. You can laugh and cry at once. That's freedom. Not the freedom of getting what you want, but the freedom of no longer needing to. The freedom of realizing that you already are what you were seeking. So, when you find yourself feeling distant from the world, don't rush to fix it. Sit quietly in that distance. Feel it, because that distance is not separation, it's space. The space in which awareness recognizes itself. And in that stillness, you begin to sense something extraordinary, that all your growing, all your seeking, all your outgrowing, were never really about reaching somewhere else. They were about remembering what you've always been. You can almost hear it in the silence, a kind of laughter beneath the surface of things. The laughter of the universe, realizing it's been playing hide and seek with itself. You pretending to be you. Me pretending to be me. And then suddenly, the game is up. We remember. And when you remember, you don't need to outgrow anything anymore, because you see that growth and decay, birth and death, coming and going, are all movements of the same ocean. You stop identifying with the wave and realize you are the water. This realization doesn't make the world vanish. On the contrary, it makes it shine. You can look at an ordinary leaf and it will bring tears to your eyes because you see eternity in it. You can sit in traffic and smile because even there you sense the divine pulse. Nothing is ordinary anymore. Everything is alive. And this, I suppose, is what it truly means to awaken, to return to the simplicity that was always here. You discover that the world you thought you had outgrown was never outside you. It was a reflection of your own awakening consciousness. The moment you stop fighting it, it transforms before your eyes. So, don't be discouraged if you feel you've drifted away from what used to be familiar. You're not lost, you're being remade. You're not breaking down, you're breaking open. And one day, perhaps when you least expect it, you'll look around and see that everything fits again. Not because it's gone back to how it was, but because you've expanded enough to hold it all. That's when you'll know you've come home. Not to a place, but to a seeing, a stillness that was here all along, quietly waiting for you to stop searching. And from that stillness, you'll realize something beautiful. You never really outgrew the world. You simply grew into the realization that you are it. You see, when we speak of awakening, we often imagine that something extraordinary must happen to us, a blinding revelation, a sudden insight that transforms the ordinary world into some kind of mystical vision. But awakening is not something you acquire, not something you can chase or earn. It is, in fact, the recognition that there was never anything to gain. The strange paradox is that when you stop trying to become awakened, you realize you already are. But, of course, saying that to a person still caught in the game of seeking sounds like nonsense. They want to know how, what to do, what step to take, and yet every step you take to find it only takes you further away, because you are moving in the wrong direction toward effort, toward the future, toward the illusion that there is somewhere to get to. Most of our lives are organized around that illusion. From the moment we begin to think of ourselves as someone, we are told that we must improve, advance, refine, and control. We measure our value by what we can obtain: more money, more knowledge, more love, more approval. Even our spiritual pursuits are infected by this disease of acquisition. We want enlightenment, like we want a new car or a diploma. We imagine that there's a ladder reaching to heaven, and all we need to do is climb faster than the rest. Yet every rung of that ladder is made of smoke, and the higher we go, the less real it all becomes. What awakening reveals is that there is no ladder, no top, no bottom, only the ever-present ground beneath your feet. When one truly awakens, one does not gain new powers or visions. One gains nothing, but in that nothing, everything changes. It is like waking from a dream in which you believed you were starving and suddenly realizing that the hunger was only part of the dream. The food you were chasing was never real, yet you, the dreamer, remain. The great secret is not that you become something different, but that you cease to need to become anything at all. What you gain is not more content in your life, but the quiet recognition of what was always there. Now, of course, our minds don't like that kind of simplicity. We think, surely it can't be that easy. We are addicted to struggle. We believe meaning comes from difficulty, that peace must be earned by effort, that wisdom must be bought with suffering. So when someone tells us that the truth is already present, that we are already free, we think it must be a trick. And so we continue searching, reading books, attending retreats, analyzing our thoughts, all the while overlooking the simple fact that the search itself is the barrier. To seek truth is to affirm its absence, just as to chase happiness is to admit you are unhappy. Awakening is the end of that chase. Imagine, for a moment, a man standing in the middle of a clear pond, frantically scooping at the water with his hands in an attempt to find what he already stands upon. He disturbs the reflection, splashing about, growing more and more frustrated. And then, suddenly, exhausted, he stops. The water settles. The reflection returns. He sees the sky mirrored perfectly beneath him. That moment of stillness, that surrender, is awakening. Not a reward for effort, but the result of exhaustion, the exhaustion of the self that seeks. So, what do you gain when you awaken? You gain the loss of what was never real. You lose the burden of trying to be someone. You gain the simplicity of being no one in particular. You lose the anxiety of time, the endless pushing toward some imagined tomorrow, and you gain the immediacy of this moment. It's not that life suddenly becomes perfect. You still get hungry, tired, lonely. You still laugh, cry, and make mistakes. But the difference is that it all happens within a vast sense of okayness. The storm still rages, but you are no longer in the storm. You are the sky that contains it. The tragedy of modern life is that we are taught to identify with the storm. We say, I am sad, I am angry, I am lost, but these are only passing clouds. You are not your thoughts any more than the ocean is its waves. When one awakens, one doesn't destroy the waves, one simply stops mistaking them for the sea. You realize that behind every rise and fall, there is a quiet stillness that never changes. And from that stillness, life moves effortlessly. You might ask, well then, if I am already this awareness, why don't I feel it? The answer is simple. You are looking for it as though it were an object. You imagine awareness as something that can be experienced, when in fact, it is the very condition for experience itself. You cannot see your own eyes without a mirror, and you cannot perceive awareness as though it were apart from you. So, in our endless attempts to observe, analyze, and define ourselves, we create more mirrors, more reflections, more distortion. But the truth was never hiding. It was simply overlooked because it was too close. That's why, when people awaken, they often laugh. Not because they've discovered something new, but because they realize how absurdly simple it has always been. It's as if you've been tearing the house apart looking for your glasses, only to find them perched on your nose. The laughter is the sound of the mind collapsing into humility. It realizes it can't grasp what it is trying to hold, because it itself is the thing being held. And so, awakening is not an achievement. It is not the result of discipline or purity or perfection. It is the relaxation of the very effort to reach it. In that relaxation, you discover what was always here, the unshakable presence of being itself. And once that realization dawns, you cannot lose it, because it was never gained. You cannot unsee what has been seen. You cannot unknow the truth that you are the very thing you were seeking. The only thing you can lose is the illusion that you were ever separate from it. Of course, awakening doesn't make you superhuman. You don't float about in a permanent state of bliss. Rather, you become profoundly ordinary. You can drink tea, take a walk, wash the dishes, and yet everything shimmers with a quiet luminosity. The sound of water, the feeling of sunlight, the laughter of a friend, all are sacred, not because they belong to some higher world, but because you finally see them as they are. You stop dividing life into sacred and profane, spiritual and mundane. You realize it was all one dance, one motion, one eternal now, And this is what awakened people gain: not detachment from life, but intimacy with it. They no longer hold themselves apart, judging, comparing, calculating. They are immersed, but not entangled. They act, but without the tension of control. They love, but without possession. They experience pain, but without resistance. The gain is a kind of effortless participation. It is the freedom to be fully human, without pretending to be divine, and yet knowing that the divine was never anywhere else. In our culture, we confuse awakening with escape. We think it means to transcend the human condition, to rise above suffering, to be beyond error. But true awakening is not escape, it is inclusion. It is saying yes to everything, even the parts you once rejected. It is realizing that the darkness, the confusion, the doubt are not mistakes to fix, but aspects of the whole to embrace. You see, the moment you stop trying to edit existence, you discover its perfection. You realize that everything you tried to push away was, in its own way, necessary for the dance to continue. This realization brings a deep compassion, for when you no longer judge yourself for being flawed, you no longer judge others for being asleep. You see them as you once were, caught in the same beautiful confusion, dreaming the same dream of control and separation. And so, instead of trying to wake them up, you simply love them. You let them be, because you understand that even their struggle is part of awakening. After all, you cannot wake from a dream you've never had. As you awaken, what you gain is not certainty, but trust. The old craving for answers dissolves, replaced by a quiet confidence that you don't need them. You no longer demand that the universe explain itself. You live as the question, open, alive, curious. You no longer seek security in belief or identity. You rest in the unknown and find that it holds you. What you gain is not knowledge, but wisdom, the kind that doesn't cling to conclusions. And what's most surprising is how utterly simple life becomes. You see, simplicity is not the absence of complexity, but the absence of conflict. When the self stops arguing with reality, everything falls into harmony. You no longer feel divided between what is and what should be. You stop rehearsing your life and begin to live it. You stop analyzing your feelings and begin to feel them. You stop searching for love and discover you are its source. This simplicity cannot be taught through philosophy. It has to be seen. It's like a mirror that reflects everything but holds on to nothing. The awakened person moves through life like that, reflecting, responding, dancing, yet untouched by the passing images. They have not withdrawn from life. They are more alive than ever, because they no longer resist it. So the great gain of awakening is the loss of struggle. The gain is the peace that comes when you stop trying to fix the world and instead allow it to unfold. The gain is the return to innocence, the unlearned trust of a child who plays without purpose, loves without calculation, and cries without shame. To awaken is to rediscover that innocence in the heart of wisdom, to see with clear eyes and still say yes to it all. And so, my friends, what you gain when you awaken is not something you can hold, not something you can show or prove. You gain a way of being, a way of seeing that transforms every ordinary act into a miracle. You gain the silence between thoughts, the stillness beneath movement, the presence within absence. You gain yourself not as an object, but as the ungraspable awareness that has always been here, waiting for you to stop searching long enough to notice. And when you begin to see this clearly, something very gentle starts to happen to your relationship with life. You stop treating it as a problem to solve, and you start listening to it like you might listen to music. You notice that each moment has its own melody, its own texture, and that you are not standing apart from it. You are the very rhythm itself, moving and changing, rising and falling, breathing in and out. To live awakened is to live musically, not mechanically. It's to sense that everything that happens no matter how apparently chaotic, fits perfectly into the larger harmony. The mind, of course, will protest. It wants to hold on, to define, to plan. It will say, yes, but what about tomorrow? What about my responsibilities, my dreams, my losses? And the answer, you see, is not to reject those concerns, but to notice that they too are part of the music. The melody includes the dissonance, the unresolved chords, the tension that makes the release so beautiful. Without them, the song would be flat and lifeless. The awakened person does not demand that life always sounds sweet. They understand that even the sour notes belong to the composition. This changes how you relate to suffering. You begin to see that pain, fear, confusion, they are not punishments, nor signs that you've done something wrong. They are movements in the great symphony of existence. And when you stop resisting them, they transform. You see the difference between pain and the resistance to pain. Pain simply arises and passes. Resistance lingers, echoing, amplifying, creating stories. The more you fight it, the deeper it digs in. The moment you allow it, the moment you say yes to even this, it begins to dissolve. Awareness itself is the cure. Now, there is something profoundly tender about that discovery, because for the first time, you stop running away from yourself. You no longer divide your inner world into good and bad, acceptable and shameful. You see that the parts you once rejected were never enemies at all. They were lost children waiting to be seen. And so, you stop trying to purify yourself into some ideal version of a spiritual being, and you begin to love the human one instead. You begin to understand that the divine expresses itself precisely through imperfection. The crack in the bowl is what allows the light to shine through. And as you grow into that understanding, something unexpected emerges humor. You begin to laugh at the whole cosmic joke. You laugh at how serious you once were, how desperately you tried to be enlightened, how tightly you clung to the very ideas that kept you trapped. You laugh because you see the absurdity of trying to control what was never yours to control. You laugh, and in that laughter, the walls collapse. The divine play, the Leela, as they call it in Sanskrit, becomes obvious. The world is not a machine grinding toward an end. It's a dance of energy, endlessly creating and dissolving itself, and you are both the dancer and the dance. When you awaken to that, the quality of your relationships also changes. You no longer approach others as instruments to your happiness. You see them as reflections of yourself, not metaphorically, but literally. You realize that there is only one awareness appearing as many points of view. So when you meet another person, you are meeting a different expression of the same being. This recognition gives rise to an effortless compassion. You no longer need to forgive because there is nothing left to accuse. You no longer need to prove because there is nothing to defend. You relate from a space of quiet understanding, free of demand. And yet, this doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. You still speak truth, you still act, you still set boundaries when necessary, but you do it without hatred, without the need to conquer or justify. Your actions arise like waves from the ocean, spontaneous, appropriate, alive. You respond instead of reacting. You participate instead of controlling. And in that way, every interaction becomes sacred, because it is no longer about getting something. It's about recognizing what's already shared. Many people imagine that awakening makes life easier, but in truth, it simply makes it real. You still face loss, illness, conflict, disappointment. The difference is that you no longer interpret these as personal failures. You see them as part of the unfolding. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin to ask, what is this showing me? The awakened person doesn't avoid storms. They learn to dance in the rain, because the rain is also part of the song. In this openness, your sense of time begins to shift. You notice that the past and the future are no longer as heavy as they once were. They appear like faint ripples across the vast stillness of now. You realize that what you called past is just memory arising in the present, and what you call future is imagination appearing here too. Everything is happening now, and this now has no edge. It is infinite, boundless, ungraspable. You stop trying to live in the moment, because you see there is nothing outside of it. The idea of living in the present becomes redundant. You are the present. When that realization dawns, anxiety begins to fade. Because anxiety always depends on time. It depends on imagining a future you must prepare for or a past you must fix. Without that timeline, fear loses its foundation. You find a quiet confidence that whatever arises will be met when it comes. You no longer need to prepare for life because you are life. And this brings with it a kind of softness, a grace. You stop pushing so hard. You stop running so fast. You start to trust the natural intelligence that beats your heart, that breathes your lungs, that turns night into day without your permission. This trust is what many traditions call faith. But it's not faith in a concept or a distant deity. It's faith in the living reality of existence itself. You begin to notice how everything works together in mysterious balance, the way pain deepens compassion, the way endings give rise to beginnings, the way loss opens space for renewal. You see that you don't need to understand it all. You can rest in the mystery, because the mystery is not against you, it is you. This resting brings about a deep stillness, even in motion. You can be busy yet peaceful, involved yet free. You no longer need to withdraw to find silence. The silence is within you wherever you go. It's the silence between the notes, the space that allows the music to be heard. The awakened person doesn't reject the world, they listen to it differently. They hear the divine rhythm in traffic noise, in children's laughter, in their own heartbeat. Everything becomes a kind of meditation, not because they are trying to be mindful, but because they can no longer help it. And gradually, a shift occurs in your motivation. You stop living to prove yourself, to accumulate, to win. You live because living itself is the play of existence. You work, you rest, you create, not out of fear or ambition, but out of the sheer joy of participation. You become like an artist painting without needing to finish the picture, knowing that the act of painting is the beauty itself. You stop striving for purpose, because you see that life doesn't have one in the way you imagined. Life is not a journey toward meaning, it is the meaning. And the more you try to impose meaning on it, the more it slips away. So what you gain when you awaken is the freedom to live without needing a reason. You are no longer driven by the anxious question of what am I supposed to do. You do what feels alive, and that aliveness becomes your compass. You realize that meaning is not found, it is expressed. Every moment you live authentically, every breath you take in awareness, is meaning itself unfolding. The awakened life is not a life of answers, but of pure response, spontaneous, creative, full of wonder. And in this simplicity, something miraculous happens. You begin to fall in love with everything. Not a sentimental love, not an emotional clinging, but a deep appreciation for the astonishing fact that anything exists at all. You walk through the world as if seeing it for the first time. The light on water, the sound of footsteps, the scent of rain, each becomes a portal to the infinite. You realize that existence doesn't need improvement. It needs only to be seen. To awaken is to see. But this seeing is not separate from doing. It's not the lazy detachment of someone who says it's all an illusion. It's the vivid engagement of someone who says it's all alive. You live fully because you no longer fear loss. You give fully because you no longer fear lack. You die to each moment, gladly, because you know you will rise in the next. That is what makes the awakened life so radiant. It's not an escape from death, but a dance with it. And this brings us to one of the greatest paradoxes. The awakened person gains the ability to lose completely. They are not afraid of endings because they know there are none. Every ending is just the beginning of another form. Just as a wave falls back into the sea only to rise again, you see that what you truly are cannot be diminished. What you gain when you awaken is the understanding that loss itself is part of wholeness, that even disappearance is a kind of presence. And so you stop hoarding moments. You stop clinging to experiences, people, even memories. You learn the art of letting things pass through you. You become transparent, like glass, allowing light to move freely. You are no longer heavy with the weight of what was or what could be. You are light, fluid, open. You are, in every sense, free. And it is in that freedom that the deepest joy emerges, not the fleeting happiness that depends on conditions, but the uncaused joy that arises simply because you are. It is not a joy that needs to shout. It hums quietly beneath all things. You feel it when you breathe, when you watch a bird take flight, when you smile for no reason. It is the joy of being itself, which cannot be taken, cannot be taught, cannot be lost. That, my friends, is the gain that never fades, the gain that was never earned, the gain that was always yours. When you begin to live from this space, you find that the whole experience of being human becomes lighter. Not easier in the sense of less demanding, but lighter in spirit. You can carry the same burdens as before, but they no longer weigh upon you in the same way. The heaviness was never in the burden itself. It was in the illusion that you were carrying it alone. The moment you see that you are the life that carries itself, the burden dissolves. Effort still exists, but the strain disappears. It is like dancing. The steps may be complex, but when you let the rhythm guide you, it no longer feels like work. Now you might say, but what about my responsibilities? What about the real challenges of life? And of course they remain. But the difference is that you meet them from a different place. You respond not from fear or obligation, but from clarity. When the mind is no longer clouded by anxiety and control, wisdom arises naturally. You see what needs to be done, and you do it without the constant commentary of self-judgment. Life moves through you with its own intelligence. You become, as it were, an instrument that plays itself. This is why the awakened person seems calm even amidst chaos. It's not that they are numb or detached. On the contrary, they feel everything more vividly than ever before. But because they no longer identify with every passing thought or emotion, they are not drowned by them. Emotions come and go like weather over the landscape, but the sky itself remains untroubled. You become that sky, and once you see yourself as the sky, you stop trying to control the clouds. You let them drift, you let them rain, you let them shine, and everything finds its place. You might notice, too, that your sense of identity begins to loosen. You no longer cling so tightly to the story of who you think you are. You stop being so certain about what defines you, because you realize that identity is not fixed. It's a process, a dance of appearances. One moment you are a teacher, another a friend, another a stranger passing by. And all these roles, though temporary, are expressions of the same consciousness. You don't have to pick one and make it permanent. You can be all of them and none of them at once. That is true freedom. It's a curious thing, but when you stop taking yourself so seriously, the universe begins to reveal its sense of humor. You start to see how the grand drama of human existence is, in a way, a play. Each of us plays our part, the hero, the fool, the lover, the skeptic, and the beauty of it is that the roles keep changing. The trouble begins when we forget it's a play. When we start believing we are the mask, we suffer. But the moment you remember, you can laugh again. You can enjoy the performance, even when it's tragic, because you know the essence behind it is untouchable. This is what many spiritual traditions mean when they talk about detachment. It's not coldness or indifference. It's the warmth of knowing that you are safe, even when things appear to fall apart. You can let the waves crash because you know you are the ocean. You can let the story twist and turn because you know you are the storyteller. And once you understand that, fear loses its grip entirely. For how can the ocean be afraid of the wave? How can the storyteller be afraid of the plot? From that space, love takes on a new dimension. It's no longer a transaction, no longer a search for completion. It becomes a natural state of being. You love not because of what you get, but because that is what life does when it knows itself. You find yourself moved by compassion not out of duty, but out of recognition. You see yourself in everything, in the stranger's eyes, in the trembling leaf, in the child's laughter, in the grief of loss. Love becomes as effortless as breathing. And this love cannot be lost because it was never dependent on conditions. It flows because you exist. And then comes the greatest paradox of all. The more you surrender your life, the more alive you feel. The more you release your need to control, the more powerful you become. Because power, in its truest sense, is not domination, it's alignment. It's the power of the river that moves mountains, not by force, but by persistence. The awakened person is like that river. They don't fight obstacles, they flow around them. They don't resist change, they become change. They move with such ease that what once seemed impossible now happens effortlessly. That is the gain that can never be lost, the power that comes from no longer needing to be powerful. And as you live in this way, you begin to see that everything that happens, even what seems terrible or senseless, fits perfectly into the whole. You stop asking, why me? And begin to ask, why not me? For you are part of the total movement of life. You are not a mistake in it, you are it. This realization does not make you passive, it makes you deeply alive. You become more responsive, more present, more in tune with the subtle cues of existence. You begin to sense what life is asking of you in each moment, and you respond naturally without hesitation. You don't have to plan your authenticity. It simply expresses itself. Sometimes people think awakening will make them separate from the world, as though they will float above it all in eternal peace. But the truth is just the opposite. Awakening brings you closer to everything. You begin to taste the rawness of life, the salt and the sweetness together. You cry more easily, laugh more deeply, love more honestly, because you are no longer afraid of feeling. You are no longer hiding behind defenses. You are open, unguarded, and that vulnerability is strength itself. You discover that to be fully human is not to escape life, but to embrace it completely. Now, you may wonder, if everything is perfect as it is, what's the point of doing anything at all? Why act? Why strive? Why care? And the answer is very simple, because that is what life does. Life creates, moves, evolves, and expresses itself endlessly. The awakened person does not act to reach a goal. They act because it is their nature to do so. The flower blooms not to impress anyone, but because blooming is what it does. The bird sings not to win applause, but because song is its essence. In the same way, your actions, when aligned with awareness, are no longer forced. They are spontaneous expressions of life's intelligence. They need no justification. This is what true purpose feels like. Not a rigid plan, but a flowing expression. You realize that you don't need to find your purpose. You need only to remove the noise that hides it. The purpose of life is not something given to you. It is what you give to life through your being. Every smile, every act of kindness, every moment of awareness is an offering. You are not here to conquer the world. You are here to be the world in conscious form. And slowly, gratitude begins to color everything you experience. You start to feel thankful even for the ordinary, the mundane, the things you once ignored. You wake up in the morning and notice the warmth of the blanket, the sound of the wind, the breath in your lungs. You realize that every single moment is a gift, not because it's pleasant, but because it exists. Gratitude is the natural fragrance of awareness. You don't have to practice it. It arises effortlessly when you are truly present. It's not something you say, it's something you feel in your bones. As this gratitude deepens, life becomes luminous. Even the simplest actions shine with quiet significance. Drinking a cup of tea, watching the sky change color, walking down the street, each becomes an act of participation in the mystery. You begin to see that enlightenment was never about escaping the world, but about seeing it clearly, seeing it as divine, even in its ordinariness. The awakened person doesn't need to go anywhere else. Heaven is not a destination. It's the realization that this, right now, is sacred. And then one day, without fanfare, you find that your search has ended. You no longer wake up asking, "How do I become awakened?" Because you understand that there was never anyone to awaken. The seeker and the sought were one and the same all along. The game of becoming has dissolved, leaving only being, and being is enough. You no longer measure your worth by what you achieve or what others see. You rest in the quiet certainty that to exist is the ultimate success. This, you see, is what awakened people gain that they can never lose. It's not a special state, not a mystical power, but a simple, profound intimacy with life. The gain is not something added, it's the removal of the illusion that you ever lacked. You have always been whole, always been free, always been the dance itself. The clouds may come and go, but the sky remains untouched. So what does it mean, really, to awaken? It means to stop pretending, to stop chasing the mirage of a future that never arrives, to stop believing that happiness depends on what happens. It means to relax into the mystery, to trust the unfolding, to realize that this moment, just as it is, contains the entire universe. You have nothing to gain because you were never missing anything. And in that realization, the search ends, not with a bang, but with a smile. That is the quiet laughter of awakening. It is the sound of life recognizing itself. It is the joy of a wave, realizing it was never separate from the sea. And once you hear that laughter, truly hear it, you know there is nothing left to fear, nothing left to chase, nothing left to lose. You are home, and you always were. There comes a time when even your will begins to tremble. You've been pushing for so long that you can't quite remember what it felt like not to. Every morning you wake up and there is that quiet command inside your head to try again, to improve, to hold yourself together. You tell yourself you have no choice, that stopping would mean failure, that rest must be earned, that somewhere deep down you can feel that you're becoming tired in a different way now. Not the tiredness that sleep fixes, but the kind that touches your bones, the kind that whispers, "Enough." Most people believe exhaustion comes from doing too much, but that's not quite true. It comes from doing what was never really yours to do. It comes from carrying identities that don't fit, from keeping promises you never actually made, from fighting to be someone you think you should be. Life was never meant to feel like constant resistance. Yet somehow we've turned even peace into a project. The modern mind has made effort into a virtue. We are told that every good thing must be earned: happiness, love, rest, even awakening. You must meditate correctly, breathe correctly, forgive correctly, live correctly. But this idea of correctness is precisely what keeps you tense. You start to treat existence like an exam, checking whether you're passing or failing at being alive. And the more you check, the more life slips through your fingers. There's a story I like about a man who went to a wise teacher and said, "I want to be at peace." The teacher smiled and said, "Drop the I, that's ego. Drop the want, that's desire. What's left?" The man sat in silence for a long while. What was left was peace itself. You see, it's not that you don't know how to rest. It's that you've forgotten that resting doesn't require permission. The tree doesn't negotiate with the wind before it sways. The river doesn't ask if it's flowing correctly. Only the human mind questions its right to be at ease. When you've been trying for too long, your own being begins to rebel. That rebellion doesn't come as anger or loudness. It comes as numbness, as disinterest, as quiet fatigue. The body begins to slow down. The spirit stops answering your ambitions, and everything feels dull. You call it burnout, but it's really honesty. It's life saying, "I cannot pretend anymore." And yet, even here, the habit to strive continues. You start to think, "I must recover quickly," or "I'll rest just enough to go back to working hard again." But true rest isn't preparation for more effort. True rest is the recognition that effort was never needed. You have been breathing life as though it were a job. You've been trying to keep the rhythm going, believing that if you stop, something terrible will happen. But life has been breathing you all along. When you stop forcing, the breath continues. When you stop controlling, the heart still beats. This is the beginning of understanding that trying is not the same as living. There's a strange beauty in realizing that you don't have to keep the world spinning. It spins on its own. You don't have to hold everything together. The universe already knows how. Think about a flower. It does not strain to bloom. It doesn't calculate when to open. It feels the warmth of the sun, and something inside it simply unfolds. That's what you are not the one making things happen, but the one being unfolded by life itself. So when you find yourself exhausted but unable to stop trying, you can begin by simply watching the trying. Don't try to quit trying, just notice it. Watch how the mind says, "Keep moving, keep fixing, keep improving," and see it as a habit, not a truth. In that watching, something miraculous happens. Awareness itself begins to rest. You realize that effort is a kind of resistance, a way of saying, "Life, you are not yet good enough." But what if life never needed to be improved? What if the moment you stop resisting it, it already becomes perfect, not in the moral sense, but in the whole sense? Trying to perfect life is like polishing a wave. The more you touch it, the more it scatters. When you stop meddling, the surface of the water becomes clear again. And in that clarity, you finally see what was always there, yourself. Not as a worker or a seeker or a struggler, but as awareness itself. Awareness is effortless. It doesn't need to maintain itself. It doesn't wake up in the morning and say, "I must continue being aware." It simply is. And that's the truth of who you are. You are not the effort, you are the space in which effort happens. The exhaustion you feel isn't a failure, it's a doorway. It's the body's way of guiding you home. It says, "Come back, stop running, nothing is chasing you." And when you listen to that invitation, something shifts quietly inside. The muscles unclench, the breath deepens, the mind stops asking what comes next. For a few brief moments, you're not a project, not a person trying to become. And when you listen to that invitation, something shifts quietly inside. The muscles unclench, the breath deepens. The mind stops asking what comes next. For a few brief moments, you're not a project, not a person trying to become. You're simply being. And that simple being, unadorned and unforced, is what you've been searching for all along. You don't have to earn rest. You are made of it. You don't have to deserve peace. You are already peace, temporarily disguised as a tired human being trying to remember where it went. When you understand that, The world doesn't need to change for you to rest. The circumstances don't have to improve. The people around you don't need to behave differently. You just have to stop holding your breath long enough to remember that life is not waiting for you to catch up. It has been carrying you the entire time. The beauty of surrender is that nothing actually stops. Everything continues, but without strain. You still work, you still love, you still face challenges, but they flow through you instead of against you. You begin to act from ease rather than toward it. And that, perhaps, is the quiet secret of all spiritual exhaustion. It isn't a curse. It's the universe's way of making you tired of pretending that you are in control. There's a moment that comes after long fatigue when even thought becomes soft. The voice that once urged you forward begins to lose its conviction. It still speaks, but its words don't land quite the same way. You should be doing more, it says. But it sounds almost tired of hearing itself. You start to notice the absurdity of how long you've been obeying it. You remember the countless times you pushed yourself because you believed something waited at the end of the road, the perfect day, the perfect peace, the perfect version of yourself. But the further you went, the more you realized there was no finish line, only a looping horizon. Every goal melted into the next one, and the moment you reached what you thought would be relief, your mind whispered, just one more step. You see, the game of self-improvement never ends because it feeds on its own dissatisfaction. It survives by convincing you that who you are right now is not enough. And as long as you believe that voice, you will never rest, not even for a breath. So the first act of wisdom is not to conquer that voice, but to recognize it for what it is, habit. It is not life itself. It is the echo of a world that believes worth is measured by motion. Every culture has its myth of progress. In the modern one, progress became a moral duty. We build faster machines, we write longer lists, we measure success by the number of things done rather than the depth with which anything was lived. Even spirituality was infected by this fever. Meditation became another race, another ladder to climb. But awareness does not improve through struggle. It simply notices. The moment you see the trap, you are already free from it. Try this sometime. Sit for a few minutes and allow yourself to do nothing. Don't even call it meditation. Just sit. You'll notice almost immediately how the mind resists. It says, I should be using this time. I should be productive. Watch that urge as if it belonged to a stranger. You'll see that effort is not your nature, it's conditioning. When you stop obeying it, something ancient begins to breathe again inside you, the quiet intelligence of rest. Look at animals. They don't rest because they've finished their to-do list. They rest because the sun is warm, because the moment invites them. They act when there is movement, and they lie still when there isn't. That rhythm, that effortless alignment with the pulse of existence, is what humans once knew before they became afraid of stillness. To be still in this world is to appear useless, and nothing terrifies the ego more than uselessness. It thrives on proving itself. Yet usefulness is temporary, while being is eternal. When you let go of the need to prove your worth, you begin to rediscover wonder. You see how much of life you've missed by trying to justify your place in it. The color of the sky, the sound of your own breathing, the subtle hum of aliveness that has always been present, these return when striving subsides. And in that rediscovery, gratitude awakens. Not the kind you list in a journal, but the kind that happens wordlessly, like a flower opening at dawn. You don't say, I am grateful. You simply feel the quiet joy of existence. That joy does not depend on success or progress. It arises from the simple permission to be. When you understand that, even tiredness feels different. You no longer resent it. You let the body rest, the mind drift, and you see that exhaustion was never your enemy, it was your teacher. It came to show you the limits of control. It came to whisper, now, stop, you've done enough. You see, effort is not wrong. It's just not meant to be permanent. It's a wave that must fall back into the ocean. The problem begins when we try to hold the wave in place, when we try to live in perpetual crest. Life breathes in and out. There are times for expansion and times for surrender. The wise person does not cling to one or the other. They move with the rhythm, as a dancer moves with the music. When you finally allow yourself to stop, you may feel fear at first. The silence can seem heavy. The stillness may feel like a void. But if you stay long enough, you realize the void isn't empty, it's full. Full of everything you were too busy to notice. Full of the pulse of being, the quiet hum of awareness itself. And then the most natural thing happens, energy returns. But now it flows differently. It no longer burns from tension, it moves from ease. You begin to act without forcing. Things get done, not through pushing, but through participation. You are no longer the worker dragging the load, you are the current carrying the boat. This is what the Taoists meant by Wu Wei, action without effort, movement without strain. It isn't laziness, it's precision. It's the intelligence of water flowing exactly where it needs to go. So when you feel that you cannot stop trying, do not fight it. See it, smile at it. Let the exhaustion do its work on you. Let it soften your pride. Let it show you how unnecessary most of your inner battles were. Eventually you will find that you can rest even while moving, that effort itself can become ease. And when that happens, life stops feeling like something to manage. It becomes something to experience. You realize that rest was never the reward at the end of the path, it was the path itself. The truth is beautifully simple. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to be carried. You are allowed to be ordinary, unaccomplished, unfinished, and still completely whole. When you finally believe that, exhaustion turns to peace. And peace is what you were trying to find by working so hard all along. There's a peculiar lightness that appears when the struggle finally dissolves. You wake up one morning and realize that the world hasn't changed, but your grip on it has loosened. The same work waits on the table. The same people expect your attention. The same sounds move through the day. Yet, something invisible is gone, that constant sense of being late to your own life. This is what true rest feels like. Not absence of motion, but absence of resistance. The river still flows, the seasons still turn, but now you are moving with them instead of against them. You begin to notice that life was never meant to be wrestled into submission. It was meant to be danced with. When you stop pulling, it stops pulling back. It's strange how this understanding arrives. It doesn't come from new knowledge, but from finally growing tired of your own tension. You no longer need to convince life to cooperate. You start to trust that it already knows where to go. And in that trust, something ancient begins to return, the natural rhythm that was always beneath the noise. You eat when hungry, sleep when tired, speak when words come, stay silent when they don't. It feels simple, almost childlike, as if the universe has taken over the task of living. The mind doesn't like this at first. It's too quiet. It doesn't have metrics for ease. It asks, am I doing it right? And life replies, there's nothing to do right. There's only what's happening. When you understand that, even your problems begin to breathe. They stop being heavy walls and start becoming passing weather. You don't deny them. You just stop identifying with them. You realize that you were never the storm. You were the sky. And the sky doesn't get tired of holding the clouds. It just lets them move. You start to see that exhaustion was never the problem, control was. You were never tired from doing too much. You were tired from trying to dictate how things should be. The effort to control is subtle. It hides inside even the most noble intentions. You try to control your emotions so that you can be spiritual, your image so that you can be loved, your destiny so that you can feel safe. But the more you try, the further you drift from the effortless intelligence that has been guiding life since the beginning. Look at the trees again. They don't manage their growth. They don't consult a plan before sprouting. Their perfection lies in their lack of strategy. They trust the soil, the rain, the sun. They let the universe grow them. And this, you see, is what the universe is doing with you. You are being grown. All the strain, all the seeking, all the fatigue, they were not mistakes, but growing pains. You were learning to let life do what it does best. You were learning to stop pretending that you are separate from its flow. Once this is seen, the world begins to look softer. You no longer judge people for being asleep or awake, strong or weak, disciplined or chaotic. You see that everyone is simply being lived by the same current, each at their own pace, each in their own shape. The need to compare dissolves, the envy fades, the guilt quiets, because now you understand that nobody is behind and nobody is ahead. There is no race. When that realization sinks in, gratitude rushes in like air into lungs that have been held too long. You start to love again, not in the sentimental way, but as a quiet recognition that everything belongs. You find beauty in the ordinary, the way sunlight touches the sink, the sound of a kettle boiling, the tired laugh of a stranger on the bus. These small things were always holy. You were just too busy chasing bigger ones to notice. This is what rest does. It restores vision. You begin to see that the sacred was never elsewhere. It was in the pauses between thoughts, in the stillness between breaths, in the overlooked simplicity of existing. And because you finally stop rushing, life starts to show you its secret patterns. You begin to see how even the difficult moments were part of your unfolding. The heartbreaks, the failures, the sleepless nights, none of them wasted. Each was carving space for something deeper to grow. There's a softness that comes with seeing this, a tenderness toward everything you once resisted. You stop dividing your experience into good and bad. It's all movement now, all expression. Rest becomes your natural state, not because you avoid work or silence your ambition, but because you finally see that even effort can be effortless when it flows from being. When you cook, you simply cook. When you speak, you simply speak. When you rest, you truly rest. Nothing stands in the way. It's not that life becomes easier, it becomes truer. The most surprising part of this transformation is that it doesn't make you passive, it makes you alive. You act more clearly because you are no longer acting from fear. You create, but not to prove anything. You help others, not because you should, but because the impulse to give rises naturally from peace. You realize that when you were striving, you were actually trying to find permission to live. And now that permission has been given not by the world, but by your own awareness. The irony is beautiful. You spent years trying to reach a place that was never absent. The one who was seeking rest was made of rest all along. That understanding doesn't require effort to maintain. Once seen, it sustains itself. And so, you walk differently now. You breathe differently. Even your tiredness feels sacred. You know that when fatigue comes again, it's not punishment. It's just another reminder to pause and return. The world continues to move fast, chaotic, demanding. But within you, there is a still point, a place untouched by hurry, a place that whispers, all is well, even when it isn't. That's the gift exhaustion came to give you. Not weakness, but wisdom. The wisdom of remembering that you don't have to be the one doing life. Life is doing you, and it's doing it beautifully.